Hi, everybody. Welcome to another wonderful lecture in the experiment and exploration series around innovators in media arts, particularly from the Bay Area. In 2 weeks, on April 4th, the artist, art historian, and activist Gregory Shillette will be here from New York to talk about art activism and social practice. And for those of you who are still curious about exactly what social practice is, Greg has written 3 books talking about that, and his books include Art as Social Practice, Dark Matter, Art and Politics in the Age of Enterprise, and his newest book, which is just out on Pluto Books, called Delirium and Resistance, Art, Activism, and the Crisis of Capitalism. So he's a very important critic and chronicler of contemporary art and how it interfaces with politics. But today we're really honored to have with us the San Francisco artist and filmmaker Lynn Hershman Leeson, who over the last 4 decades has been internationally acclaimed for her innovative new media art and films. Over these years, she's made pioneering contributions to new media forms, including photography, video, performance, installation, interactive, as well as net-based art. One of the most influential media artists in the US, Hershman Leeson is widely recognized for her experimental work investigating issues that are now recognized as key to the workings of society: the relationships between humans and technology, identity and surveillance, and the use of media as a tool of empowerment against censorship and political repression. On Monday, our class got to watch parts of one of Lynn's early works, The Electronic Diaries, which was a pioneer work of feminist video art. And we were struck by her courageous use of the video medium to speak about women's experiences that are silenced or hidden. And in the Me Too era, Lynn's work seemed prescient and groundbreaking. Amazingly, Lynn has also made 5 feature films: Strange Culture, Technolust, Conceiving Ada, Women, Art, and Revolution, which is a wonderful history of feminist art and performance in the post-war years. A Secret History, and a portrait of the Cuban artist Tania Bruguera called Tania Libre, which hopefully Lynn will say something about today. Her works have screened in theaters and festivals internationally, including the Sundance Film Festival, Toronto Film Festival, the Berlin International Film Festival. Her film, Technolust, was awarded the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation Prize for Writing and Directing, and Women, Art, and Revolution received the Grand Prize Festival of Films on Art. Her first comprehensive museum retrospective of her work, titled Civic Radar, was in 2014, which began at the Center for Art and Media in Karlsruhe, Germany, and traveled to San Francisco at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. Lynn's artworks are in the collections of the Museum of Modern Art, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Zentrum für Kunst und Media Technology, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Tate Modern, and the list goes on. Currently, her latest installation, Vertighost, is now on view at the San Francisco Legion of Honor, and it's inspired by the Legion of Honor's role as a location for Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo. Lynn explores the tension between the pursuit of truth versus the difficulty or lack of desire to distinguish between reality and fiction. I think it closes on the 25th, so on Sunday. So after this is over, you can hop over the bridge and check it out. And if all of that wasn't enough, Lynn has just been honored with the by the Women Caucus for Art for a Lifetime Achievement Award and the College Art Association's Distinguished Feminist Award for a Visual Artist. So join me in welcoming Lynn Hershman Leeson.
Well, thanks for coming today. I appreciate being here. I'm going to show some, just the PowerPoint here. So I divide my work into BC, which is before computers, AD, which is after digital, and now it's BC again for biological computing. And I'm going to be going through chronologically some of the works that I've done over the past 50 years or so. And my most, I mean, it's really kind of fun to show these particular works now here at the University Art Museum, because my most relevant works were born on the cusp of disaster. And in around 1971, 72, this work that's on your right was shown here because the university was threatened with having their funding cut unless they started to show women, because they hadn't shown any. And they decided to do a 3-person drawing show. And to me, sound was a medium that went through the air like in a wave. So it seemed to me that doing this work, which had sensors and had sound, was a kind of a drawing. And the way this worked was you would stand in front of it. Those days, sensors were mats on the floor, and you could talk to this being. It's called Self-Portrait as Another Person, and this is, of course, during the Civil Rights era. Where the Black Panthers were very active, and questions of identity were really prevalent. And within a day, the show was closed down by Brenda Richardson, who said that media wasn't art, it didn't belong in a museum, and they didn't want to show my work. So nobody told me. I came here to see the show and found out that it had been closed down. So, and I think afterwards I've talked to some people, and I think that this was the first time that sound was used as an element in sculpture. Of course, I never know that I'm the first one that does these things, because it just seems so obvious that I just assume other people had done it. I just gave a talk in Amsterdam, and somebody suggested that part of the reason it could have been shut down was because it was a Black woman with a voice, and that had never occurred to me. But I'm sure that all these things played into it. But these were a number of wax sculptures that, as I said, would breathe or else would talk to you. So a lot of the work I was doing with what I call cyborgs now was looking inside of something and looking at what making the inside become a major part of the work. This cyborg's 1965, and while I didn't know it at the time, there were 2 scientists, Klein and Klein, who had just discovered something through a telescope that they named Cyborg. And I didn't know the name at the time, but obviously there was something in the air that did that. And they were able to see this again because the lens of the microscope had been improved. And it's not that it wasn't there before, but suddenly they were able to see something alive and moving, and they gave it this name. Around the time that my work was finally shown for a day, I was thinking about the fact that women, couldn't show at all in museums or galleries. It just was not done. So what I did was I became an art critic, and I wrote for 3 different journals under the name of Prudence Juris, Gay Abandon, and Herbert Good, which is a translation of Yerba Buena. And these, they would write for local journals, for throwaways, for weeklies, and they would write in different voices and different textures of their language. But they would occasionally write about Lynn Hershman, and they would also fight about whether or not Lynn Hershman's work was valid or valuable. And there were, after a while, there were so many articles about Lynn Hershman that I took these articles into galleries, and that's how I got my first show. So at the end of having my work canceled at the University Art Museum, I was with my friend Eleanor Coppola, and we were walking down the Berkeley streets. Actually, we were meeting at the Cafe Trieste, but walking down the Berkeley streets, I saw, I was reminded of the free speech movement and what it was all about, you know, and all the closed up windows at the Bank of America. And I started to think, who needs a museum anyway? If you want to show your work, you could do it anywhere. So Eleanor and I rented rooms in a kind of low rent hotel room. And there was one right around the corner from the Cafe Trieste called the Dante Hotel. And Eleanor had a live person in her room, and it lasted for about a week. His name was Tony Dingman, and people were able to trespass into his space for 24 hours a day. And in my room, which is what you see here, I had some of the wax figures and breathing and sound elements. And the way this worked was that you would go to this space that we only let people know about with a couple of Xeroxed images around town, and you'd get a key at the desk and sign in. Now, this was before the word site-specific had been coined. And so this piece lasted, it was open 24 hours a day. It was curated by the residents who liked it. At the end of a year, somebody went in and saw one of these wax body parts and called the police because they thought somebody had been murdered. And the police came in and took everything to the central headquarters, which seemed like an apt closure to that particular episode. So in this room, there were artifacts from the neighborhood of somebody who could have lived there. And I started to think about what it would be like to liberate the essence of a character who might have stayed in the room, but really could exist in real time and real life. And that's how this character entered the world. Now, this is Roberta Brightmoor, and she was, her background was written as kind of her armature, and in constructing her background, I had to figure out what her education was, what her traumas were, and so forth, in her kind of accumulated, stereotyped data. She saw a psychiatrist, she used specific language, she had a unique handwriting, she secured credit cards at a time that I couldn't, because I had bad credit and Roberta had no credit. As I say, she had all the trappings of what made somebody real. And I hired a surveillance photographer that would go out and photograph Roberta in her activities. And after she was over, not while she was alive, I exhibited these things as kind of an interactive archive. Roberta would, I see that this image is not, these images aren't opening up for some, yeah, these two anyway. But this is just a picture of her driver's license to prove that she had one. She was really a mirror of culture, so she would reflect what was going on at that time. Spain, who's a comic artist, did a Zap comic issue on Roberta, and she would reflect back the elements of the culture that she lived in. Eventually, there were 3 Robertas that would go out to kind of verify the negative experiences that she was having in the world. And she was finally, she lived 9 years, after which she was exorcised in Lucretia Borgia's crypt in Italy. So unlike, I don't know why these images aren't coming, but unlike Roberta, who would go out and meet people in the world, Lorna was an interactive laser disc. And in Lorna, somebody would sit in Lorna's room and use a remote switch to activate elements of her life. And this was the first time anybody ever used interactive technology and computers to make an artwork. So it's really, to me, was like an extension of Cubism. It was a way of looking at something in all dimensions and having choices about how to construct the story of this character. This is, after Lorna came Deep Contact, which was again an interactive artwork. This was 1984, and it was the very first time a touchscreen had been used, and it was constructed with a HyperCard along with us. I worked with Sarah Roberts, who is now at Cal Arts, but lived here at the time, in order to make this piece. And the way Deep Contact operated was that you would touch a woman's body, and depending upon where you touched it, this would link to various adventures that she had. The adventures would be either to go with a demon or with a Zen master, and you would start to participate and understand who she was and what she was doing through your choices. Now, also in this, this kind of anticipates DVDs, but at the time I made this and Lorna, nobody understood them. In fact, Lorna wasn't shown for 25 years after it was first done. It's just been purchased by a major New York museum. Same thing with Deep Contact. People just didn't get these works. There was not a language to understand them, and that's really critical when you're talking about what works are, and tying them to a history of art in a completely new way, where people couldn't really get their heads around why this was art. So, around the same time, I made this piece, which is called America's Finest. And the way America's Finest works is that you pull the trigger of a gun, and you look through the gun sight. There's a hidden surveillance camera. When you pull the trigger, the history of guns and warfare would filter through what you saw in the gun sight. But because of these hidden surveillance camera, the viewer would be placed inside the gun sight as the trigger was being pulled. So the viewer became both the aggressor and the victim simultaneously. This piece is called, these are 2 pieces, they're called Tilly and Cyber Roberta. And around that time of 1994, 1993, I started to work with the internet as part of the sculpture itself. So on the left you see Tilly the telerobotic doll, and on the right you see Cyber Roberta. And the way this operates is that you could, on a website, and it still exists on lynnhershman.com, because this is currently up at the IC in Boston, you press the eyes. If you turn left, the doll's head telerobotically moves to the left. If you press right, her head moves to the right. So she's essentially a surveillance system. It's kind of like a nanny cam became 10 years later. I had her in my studio, and I could see what was happening wherever I was by just looking through Tilly's eyes. or Cyber Roberta's later, the two Dolly clones would steal and pirate each other's information when they were shown in the same in the same room. And their faces became a mask for multiple expressions of the self that links people to each other. By looking at the world through Tilly the Telerobotic doll's eyes, viewers became voyeurs, and they also became virtual cyborgs, because through their eyes and through Tilly's eyes they were able to see. So they were part human and part trespassing into the networks, and they were part machine. And viewers literally used the doll's eyes, which were quick cams, in order to extend their own remote vision. So the eyes I call icons, and as I said, the left eye is in color, and the right eye is black and white. And if you're in front of the doll in the physical space, you get uploaded as well. So these are some works I started in the early 80s, pre-Photoshop. And these are, I call them phantom limbs, and they're really, again, about capture, because these other systems, like the gun, are about capture, and about how media captures our image and manipulates it and changes it, and particularly women's images. So kind of is self-evident what this is. Next came around a few years later came Cynthia Stock Ticker. And this is a piece that measures the stock market. So I think this was made around the year 2000, so maybe close to 20 years ago. And there are 5 different stock markets that she measures. And when the market goes up, she starts buying things. If it goes down, she starts drinking. And there are live feeds as to, I mean, this happens in real time, and there are live feeds as to what her behavior is, depending upon the market that's driving her. And it's kind of reflects how our own cultural personality shifts as well, according to how the market is doing. So around that time, I started to make movies, and this one was called Conceiving Ada. I'm going to show you a little clip from this at the end of this. And Conceiving Ada was a film about Ada Lovelace. Ada Lovelace was the woman who was not credited for writing the first computer program. Babbage was credited with doing it. And when I found out in 1993 about Ada Lovelace, by accident, I realized that nobody knew about her. Nobody knew that this daughter of Lord Byron and a very renowned mathematician had actually conceived and written the code for computer language. Later on, the military used her name in order to make a language out of that. So this was the first feature film that I did with Tilda Swinton, and it takes place in two time zones, the present and also Ada's life, and she trespasses into the present from the past. And in order to do this on the budget I had, I did something that's called virtual sets. And what virtual sets do is we shot all of the 18th century scenes in front of blue screen, and then we used QuickTime and images that were found in bed and breakfast places around San Francisco that we inserted in, and that became kind of the viable look of the film. This is the design for the animation of this little bird that helped them to go between time zones. We shot it very quickly. because Tilda's agent didn't want her to work on the film because we had almost no money. But when I happened to meet a friend of hers who told her about the film, and then Tilda called me and she wanted to do it, she said, okay, but you have to, the agent said, okay, but you have to shoot it in 5 days. So I figured 5 days with her was better than 2 months with anyone else. So we shot the virtual sets on blue screen, and the rest of it was on 35. So while we shot this in 5 days, it took us almost 2 years to edit it, because at that time, one part of it was 35 millimeter, the other part was video, and the frame rates were different, so we had to do it frame by frame. And there were not machines in those days that allowed you to do that. So I worked with an editor named Bob Dalva, who was able to translate this. And again, Technolust, I don't know why these images, I'm going to go through afterwards and show you these images. Technolust was the next one I did, which was about a scientist by the name of Rosetta Stone, who cloned herself 3 times to create these self-replicating automatons that lived in her basement. And it's really the story of their coming of age and entering the world and getting out of the basement that they lived in. And this was the first high definition film that was ever shot. It was shot right around the time that George Lucas was doing Star Wars, and we were both in the same lab. And the lab technician said, "Your film looks so much better than Star Wars. What do you have that George Lucas doesn't have?" And I said, "Well, personal debt." So let's see. So well, I should show you this. Well, you know, when I was trying to make this film, I wanted to do something that would extend outside of the film. So it's kind of like an expanded cinema. And I had the idea to do an AI bot. I mean, we didn't call it bot, but I wanted to do something that had intelligence that would talk to a user. And we started in 1995 when we did the film to figure out how we would make something like this. And eventually, you know, we found 18 programmers around the world using the internet to find them in order to actually create this AI version of Agent Ruby. So that this version online was a character from the film. And the way this worked also was when you watched Technolust in those days, the program would leap from the screen into anybody that had a Palm Pilot, so that when you left the theater, one of the characters was on your Palm Pilot and you could talk to her, since this character in the film had an online chat session. So I wanted to expand the idea of this bot. She's still there, by the way. She still lives. I gave her to San Francisco Museum of Modern Art because I couldn't afford her upkeep, and she's the most visited artwork in their collection. It's if you just go to agentruby.net, you could talk to her. And there was an exhibition in 2013 of Agent Ruby, and they found that there were 80 tons of responses over 12 years to this bot. And so they called the information down into about a dozen books that talked about things like the economy, humans and machines, wars, and you really can track the cultural questions of each era through the books and through the questions that people had talking to the bot. So I wanted to go further than just using your hands to type. And so that was the genesis for creating Dina. And Dina can talk to you. I consider her to be the daughter of Agent Ruby, and our daughters are always smarter than we are. So this one had a different kind of intelligence in that she began to have some learning capability. But she actually could talk to you and answer any question that you talk to her about. So these are the two ways that she could communicate here, both on a live screen or on a small monitor. And I'm not showing you all my work. I'm just kind of skimming through a few things that I've done. So this is Women Art Revolution. I started in the 60s. It seemed to me one of the more interesting things that was happening was the women's movement that was modeled on the Black Panther movement. And so anytime somebody came to San Francisco, I would sit them down, borrow a camera, and do an interview with them. And then suddenly I had 17,000 hours, like 35 years later, of this information. And it turned out, again, that nobody had collected this information. And I started to show them to some of the students I had, and they had no idea what the feminist movement was about or who these artists were. So I really felt compelled, finally, to tell the story. But it took 4.5 months to look at the footage one time. So how do you make a film with so much material and so much really important material? And that's really what held up my being able to do this. And I worked over 4 years editing this film, and finally I gave the footage to Stanford, and they were able to get a Supporting Creative America grant, and they put everything online. And that freed me to be able to tell one story of the many. So if you go to Stanford, you can go to the Special Collections Library online, and there's a listing of all the artists that I interviewed. I think there were like 65 artists, and substantially, like 17 hours with Carol E. Schneeman and 20 hours with Judy Chicago, and they were substantial interviews that were done not just once but over decades. So you were able to see the changes in their thinking, in their process, in what they accomplished, and people still do go there and use these archives. So I thought, well, women have been outtakes for most of art history, and I wanted to make a film that had no outtakes. So I consider all of this work part of this film, and I hope you'll get to see it at some point. So this is one of my latest works. It's going to be opening soon. It's called The Infinity Engine, and now we're going back to biological computing. As I had made a film, Women Art Revolution, which, as I said, I spent 4.5 years editing. I didn't do any artwork during that time, and I was the only one that I tried to have other editors, but nobody could understand the story. I went through many editors who weren't there and didn't understand the players or what was important, what was relevant. So I ended up being the only one that could do it. And I made another film called Strange Culture, which was about the artist Steve Kurtz. And it was about the fact that Steve Kurtz had been charged with bioterrorism because of an artwork he was presenting in a museum. And he was facing a potential 23-year prison sentence. And I felt this was so outrageous that I felt I had to make this film. And I made the film about him and the circumstance. He couldn't speak during the film because on orders of his attorneys, so I had a stand-in of an actor, Thomas J. Ryan, who played him, and Steve would be next to him, but the actor would speak. And so we were able to tell the story in that way, and opened the Berlin Film Festival. It was shown all over the world. New York Times said it was a perfect film, and there was so much response from that film that Steve's charges were dropped. And he will tell you he's very grateful and I'm very grateful to have had this opportunity to work together and to see how important art making can be for social change and for dynamic reshifting the culture's prejudices So after I did Women Art Revolution and Strange Culture, I started to think, what are the issues today? You know, what's worth the time it takes to do an artwork that speaks to the issues today? And I realized that that it was really the programming of the genome, because with that, it transplanted a completely different mentality into what the possibilities of life is, what our future is, what evolution is, and what identity is. So I constructed this piece, which is called the Infinity Engine, and in it there are 8 rooms, and as I say, it's going to have its final room put together in a couple of weeks in Basel, Switzerland. But you walk through various labs, and this required, again, doing a lot of research, talking to Nobel Prize winners in the field, talking to maybe 22 scientists, and really understanding what was going on right now. And so there's wallpaper in the room, and the wallpaper shows real images of things that are being mutated as we speak. You know, for instance, and I made these images. There are thousands of these mutations, so many so that there are banks now of what original DNA looks like or is, so that we don't forget what a Macintosh apple is or what a cat is. And you know, this is a cat that was crossed with a jellyfish so that they could track the AIDS virus. It also has features a facial recognition system that reverse engineers a viewer's face and tracks back to their origins genetically. Bioprinted nose, a nose that was actually printed by the man who invented bioprinting, Anthony Atala. And this is a scaffold for what's used for printing a nose. And many other relevant things are in this room. And one that I'm just going to show is this next one. But this as I say, it's about the ethical implications and the actual implications of the genetic engineering of DNA, and how we're all going to have to survive the battle of evolution. So I was very fortunate because when I realized I was going to do a show of the entire rooms, of the entire 8 rooms, which deal with ethics, with bioprinting, with other kinds of mutations, and it was going to be in a museum in Basel, Switzerland. Basel, Switzerland is the capital of pharmaceuticals. So I wanted to do something with a pharmaceutical company. So I started to have conversations with scientists at Novartis. And the end of that, which has been going on for about a year, is the creation of what they call the Lynn Hershman antibody. And I realized that I've been making antibodies my whole life, because what an antibody is something that's released into culture that points out where the toxins are and attempts to neutralize them. So you could look at that in all of my work, and I'm really pleased that they were able to do this. It's being harvested. They say it's strong. They say it's over 99% pure. They don't know how they did it to get something this strong. If we're successful, April 24th, when the harvesting is finished and we see it, and Swiss television is going to be there when it's finally done, to kind of see the aha, it's alive moment, it hopefully will be something that will be used as therapeutic means for healing immune disorders. So going from these external things of dealing with the robotics of a body and the cyborgian aspects of a body, to actually having something named after you that becomes internalized and actually can have a different kind of healing effect on our species. So the final part of this, or the semi-final part of this, is came out of some of my discussions with scientists, and I got to talk to a man by the name of George Church, who wrote a book called Regenesis, and who is considered the father of synthetic biology. And he told me about some of the things he's been doing in converting film to DNA itself. And what they've been doing is using synthetic DNA as an archival means of storage. So, for instance, they started with Millay's voyage to the moon, and they were able, because apparently Millay's hated his work, as many artists do, and he tried to destroy everything, but they found the snippets that weren't quite destroyed of one film, Voyage to the Moon, and they were able to reconstruct that, and he's working with Microsoft and Technicolor, and so they reconstructed Voyage to the Moon and stored it in DNA, and the DNA the stored information on DNA will last 1 million years, longer than the planet will. So, maybe our options are to also find satellites for Earth where this information should be, but right at the present, I mean, that's up to your generation to be thinking about, but at this present moment, DNA itself is being used as an archival means of storage. And so the last room that in this Infinity Engine installation will be a lab door that you look through. It's kind of an homage to Duchamp's Étant Donné, where you can't enter the room, but inside a mirror box inside the room will be DNA of all the information that I put together since 1984, and anything that had to do with genetics and the interviews that I've been doing, and the electronic diary, because it becomes my archive as well. So I wanted to just show you in closing just a couple things. I also want to show you those clips that are missing. Where is it? So this is a line from Conceiving Ada that Ada says right before she dies.
The redeeming gift of humanity is the ability of each generation to recreate itself.
So, that's your task is as the next generation to recreate life in the most profound way that your generation sees it, my hope is that you'll find a way to preserve the positive elements of the planet and move forward with it. So I found with every disaster, there was indeed an opportunity. Not being able to show my work 50 years ago created the opportunity to do all these other works. And 3 years ago, when I had the exhibition in Germany, I was able to show the works that were rejected. And in fact, when I had the show at Yerba Buena, it was only about 20% of the exhibition. There were 200 works there. In Germany, there were over 800. So I was able to show, as I said, 65% of that work had never been seen because nobody would show it because everybody said that it wasn't art. So I was able to reintroduce that work with the patina of time and with the patina of history. And I think now there's a new opportunity to participate in a revised lens to look through the constantly expanded aperture in which I would look forward to a time of tolerance and live intergalactic connectivity. So I'd like to, if you want to throw me the first, and I can get my other, maybe it's on this one. I'll bet it's on this one. This has encountered a problem. Yeah. I'm just trying to get the PowerPoint to show the images. Yeah. Is that the one
This one,
that I just showed?
no,
Oh, yeah.
this has images.
Oh, good, okay. I can go through that, and I'll just show, yeah. So, yeah, this is Technolust, an image where Tilda plays several parts. I think Lorna, and Lorna was the environment that you pressed. We had to invent a lot of the wording on this to get people to do it, because nobody understood what an interactive laserdisc was or how to operate it. Let's see some of the other ones that you missed here. Yeah, this is Agent Ruby. Yeah, this is the wallpaper for these things that have been, yeah. I think that was all that was missing. So you get a sense of, oh yeah, driver's license. So, any questions? Yeah, Maggie.
I have an accolade.
A what?
An accolade. I can't, I've known you for a long time, even though I haven't seen your most recent work. And it just seems to come, when you have this kind of distance that we have, it makes so much more, you see how much work you do, and unbelievable amounts of work, and how actually, even though we won't understand it because it's new, and when it's there, then later on, it's really, it has a cohesion that's much more available, and so it's just it's very essential, I think, for understanding your work, to be able to think that way, which happens to people that are getting old. Haha. So anyway, so I don't really have any questions, except that I'm very happy.
Oh, thank you. Well, you certainly contributed. You're one of the very few people that wrote about my work, and it was really important. And you know, since I say I haven't had I didn't have a review in the Bay Area from 1984 until 2017. But I would do a show in the Bay Area, and it would be written about in Spain or in Italy, but not in the Bay Area. But I'm very fortunate that I had this exhibition in Germany, as well as a book, you know, because I wasn't really interested in exhibition, because you put it up, take it down, and nobody remembers it, but I was really interested in having a book, and this museum has a director who makes incredible books, so I was very fortunate, you know, to be able to do that, and also to have the work historified and seen finally in the context of this exhibition. I'll always be grateful. Most of the works are online, by the way, so you could watch them for free, except for Women Art Revolution. Although I think somebody, what? I didn't hear what you said.
could you say, the one with 800 pieces, was that, and then there was one in
Yerba Buena took it, but Yerba Buena is so much smaller. And the museum that did the show is the biggest museum in Germany, and the best funded museum in Germany. So they were able, and as it was, they found like 500 pieces after the show opened that I forgot about. But so they put, they had a free selection. Yerba Buena has a relatively tiny space comparatively, but I was really grateful to Lucia, who did a very intelligent job of culling it down to a quarter of its size and still created something that was comprehensive.
I sent you a note about that in Yerba Buena because I had never seen a lot of your paintings. And
Yeah, nobody had.
and they were really great. Now that silly persons that have prevented you from getting anything, if you just put a few of those up, then you would have some kind of way of getting into the regular swim. But maybe that wouldn't be such a good thing. Who knows? But I was really impressed with your beautiful paintings and their unusual kinds of ways of doing it.
Thank you.
Could you share some of the ways that you've made an impact through your work?
Shed light on.
Some of the ways you've made an impact with your work, or your work is.
Well, my work has been waiting for your generation to be born, because it's your generation that really understands what I'm doing. I think, and people say that my work has influenced them, so that there is a pretty substantial following of people who, younger people who identify with the issues that I'm dealing with. We created Dina, which was a talking AI bot. We started in 1996. Siri came out in 2012. Every one of these things has had a commercial application, whether it's interactive DVDs or touch screens afterwards. But when I work with the programmers I work with, we don't do these things in order to make any kind of commercial element that we don't make any product. We try to kind of explore the technologies and the elements of our time that we're born into in order to push the edges in a way that normal people who are trying to make a product don't. So for us, the real payoff is being able to invent these things and seeing how far we could push them. So I don't know that anything, I patented the virtual sets, but then other people did too. So, afterwards, and if one thing changes, then the whole thing changes. I patented Technolust. I have a copyright on it, and I had shown the film to Spike Jonze because Tilda wanted him to be in it, and then he came out with a film called Her, which got an Academy Award for writing, which is almost identical to Technolust. So I think that these works had, and in fact, the Atlantic Monthly did an article about that. So these works have had a lot of influence. But I think if you ask a particular work, I'd have to track that particular work and see what effect it's had.
Okay, I have so many comments, but I just want to ask you, is there anything of your art that resides at the university here in Berkeley?
They never bought anything. I gave them some things. I gave them one of the sculptures that was then had an attempted murder where somebody stabbed it shortly after they showed it, and I don't think they ever showed it again. And I have some things that I gave them that are in their archive, but I don't think they've ever shown my work here since that time, nor did they buy anything. We tried. I think people don't understand these things and they get upset when they see something they don't understand. America's Finest, the gun, was also murdered several times. Even in the Tate Museum, people would jump on it, disconnect it, cut the cords. You know, in that case, I could understand that a gun could provoke that kind of like it was charged with a kind of aggressive element, but who knows?
I had a question about how I was interested in your work was a lot of like interaction with art and people, and then you also said in your last comment like for us to recreate life. I was wondering if there was something in reality for maybe personally for you that it felt necessary for us to recreate life, maybe because there's lack of life, or I don't know if that question makes sense to you.
Are you talking about the mutated life that we're doing, that we're creating?
That too, and I just felt like a lot of the work engaged in like interaction with people and the work, and I was just curious if there's anything you thought in reality that there's a lack of life that you feel necessary that art should recreate life.
Well, I think that the work I did created a dialogue, an interactive dialogue with users and an audience, so that they became complicit with the elements that the work was about. So it wasn't just what Duchamp called retinal art, you know, where you just looked at it, but you actually participated in it. And much of it is activating social change as well. But if you're talking about the actual life forms that are that are being made through CRISPR editing, you know, that's a completely different conversation.
Hi. I had a question about a work you actually didn't necessarily show, and maybe like considered a work, not a work. Like the Floating Museum, which is also in relation to like Roberta Brightmoor and like the Dante Hotel. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the situation in San Francisco at the time that kind of like prompted such an intervention of like working outside of a museum or outside of an institution, as you had done with like other works.
Yeah, I meant to actually mention that as well. But when I did the Dante Hotel, it was a huge success. You know, and I think it was listed at the end of the year as one of the top 10 shows, and you know, along with the Turner watercolors at the Legion. And so I started to take that idea of using something site-specific around to different locations. I did windows at Bonwood Teller. I did hotel rooms of different kind of socioeconomic elements in New York. And then I thought, well, why not create a system that would allow other artists to see how easy it is to just do their work in, again, real time and real space. So that's how the Floating Museum started. And essentially, I just invited people whose work I wanted, whose work I liked, and people I wanted to meet, to come to San Francisco, find a place outside of a museum structure, and construct a work. Over the 3 years that the Floating Museum existed, there were over 300 works from artists from 8 different countries that were coming and doing works on the airwaves, on billboards, all over town, in the elevators at the museum. I got the museum, San Francisco Museum, to allow me to show this for, I think, a month, and people would have hour-long shows, and so that they could put down that they had a one-person show at the San Francisco Museum afterwards, and it was all over their space as well. And it also was showing dancers and performance and comic artists, because dancers, performance, and comic artists weren't considered to be artists. Photography was barely considered to be an art form. So I think that this had a big influence on creative time, on many other institutions that started to do works without walls. The Floating Museum has not had its due yet. People are just beginning to find out because of this show, you know, that it even existed, but there are several people thinking about doing books about what it accomplished.
Hi, I noticed that you had like two themes that kind of contrasted. One was interest in transgenics and kind of like evolution of technology, and another was recreation of beauty in our generation. How would you mediate these two kind of
Recreation
of beauty, like our generation?
beauty. Can you give me an example of what that was?
So, it was what she had mentioned earlier, how our generation should recreate beauty, life. Yeah.
Yeah, your generations need to recreate, find its own identity and find its own form for what's important in your life. In my lifetime, I was really interested in doing something that didn't repeat history, and here we are in the Bay Area where we're constantly inventing the present that people think is the future, but all these things are being invented here that have literally reshaped the world digitally. That is an evolution, a technological evolution that has resulted also in a human evolution and a physical evolution. But as far as the determining what your generation will do, I can't presume to tell you. I know that I talked to some young people, and they're all thinking about finding ways to colonize other spaces beyond Earth.
Hi, I was wondering, it seems that you have a lot of kind of appreciation for your work actually simmering and maybe not being acknowledged at first, and then kind of seeing the larger arc of it, including what you said about Women Art Revolution, where this incredible archive now exists, partially because it wasn't acknowledged or appreciated when you were working on it, but now you have these decades of incredible material. At the same time, you said, I think in relation to your last project, to genetic engine, what's worth the time to do the work that it takes? So it seems like a different kind of thinking about what's worth doing. So I was curious about that tension. If you can say a little bit.
Yeah, I think you really have to believe in what you're doing because nobody else will. And they may not ever believe in it. And I'm just very fortunate that they started to understand what I was doing in my lifetime. But you have to, really have a forceful will and understanding that what you do is relevant, and also keep your sense of humor, not throw anything away, so that eventually time will catch up to it. And probably the best work won't be recognized in its time because, it's like an amoeba. Culture is like an amoeba, and it moves very slowly, but eventually the foot will catch up. And even if it doesn't, it's your life, and how are you going to spend your time? And what do you want your life to be about?
Lynn, I wanted to ask about, here it says fiction is truth, and I wanted to ask about the status of truth in your work. And your early work is so much about the question of personal identity, and the diaries seem to destabilize ideas about are these narratives real narratives? Are they fiction narratives? You have fictional people who you've created, and you move in and out of those figures, and then as you move forward, you're creating artificial identities, artificial beings, all the way to now DNA. And so there's this thread about the way in which this work, all of this work, somehow is destabilizing that sense of what truth or what the real is in all of these things. And so in many ways, as you get more into the science part, I begin to understand why the art part is so necessary. And so I wonder if you could sort of talk about how this notion of truth moves through your thinking and the kinds of work that you do.
Well, I think that I've always questioned truth and been drawn towards the edge of what is kind of the blurred line of what's truth and what's fiction, and the porous wall, where one falls into the other. And I think one could justify that fiction's truth and relevant as much as they can that truth is fiction and relevant. And, both of these aspects, even, fake news is important, and it creates a different sense of truth about our culture, looking for fake news and why they're doing that, and the analysis of what is fake, and what relevance that has. So I think that both sides of that give us a fuller picture of credibility.
And so the whole question of how we can think critically about what we're experiencing, that your works activate us in a way that causes us to question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to question everything, and not accept anything, and form your own conclusions, for sure, and be ruthless.
Any last questions? Maybe that's a good place to
Yeah,
stop.
well, my son-in-law is an editor, and the editors for my next film and for Vertighost are here. And my son-in-law always says that editing is being ruthless, and I think what we do is edit our lives, out of our choices.
Well, thank you, Lynn, for coming and joining us.